estimated at 20 million, or 1 in 9 American households. The election of 1960 marked the first time these conservative broadcasters flexed their political muscle on a national stage. A quick look at chart figure 1.1, which counts the radio stations that aired McIntyre's program, illustrates both the precipitous rise of right-wing radio and the scale of the problem confronting John F. Kennedy. As the chart indicates, McIntyre's radio show, the 20th Century Reformation Hour, aired on just 2 stations in 1957, but by 1960, that number had swelled to more than 100 stations spread across the nation. A near exponential growth curve meant that these radio preachers were no longer just a backwoods problem. Kennedy responded to the crisis in West Virginia by forming a strategic alliance with the National Council of Churches. With 45 million members, the National Council of Churches was the largest religious organization in the United States. It had its own set of concerns regarding conservative radio preachers, detailed in Chapter 6, so it was happy to provide Kennedy with Protestant covering fire. The campaign quickly mailed a selection of pro-Kennedy quotes from National Council of Churches executives to every Protestant minister in West Virginia, encouraging them to read the endorsements aloud to their congregations in the weeks leading up to the vote. The tactic helped Kennedy win the West Virginia primary. Kennedy learned 2 very important lessons from the episode. First, that right-wing radio was a serious political threat. And second, that dealing with these broadcasters required cooperation with allied interest groups. Kennedy would need that kind of help again. The overriding priority of a first-term president is becoming a second-term president. Kennedy had beaten Richard Nixon in the 1960 general election by the thinnest of margins, just 118,574 votes out of the more than 68 million cast, and he expected an equally tough rematch in 1964. But while the West Virginia crisis was Kennedy's first encounter with right-wing radio, it would by no means be his last. Conservative broadcasting continued to grow during Kennedy's term in office. By 1964, Carl McIntyre's program had quadrupled its station count to 480 stations. The threat of right-wing radio had metastasized from a West Virginia problem in 1960 to a national problem by 1964, a situation drawn in sharp relief by maps which show the radio stations airing McIntyre's program during those 2 years. These maps are of interest not only for the sheer number of stations dotting the country, and McIntyre had at least 1 station in all 50 states, though never all at the same time, but also for where they were concentrated. Of McIntyre's 480 stations in 1964, over half, or 262, were in the South. This New Jersey preacher had built a massive audience below the Mason-Dixon line. Indeed, there was a strong correlation between those states with the densest per capita concentrations of right-wing radio stations, like South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and those states that voted for Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater in 1964. To the modern eye, the maps may not seem surprising, given half a century of Republican domination in presidential elections in the southern states. But the transition from a solidly blue Democratic South to a solidly red Republican South was still in its infancy in the early 1960s. Traditionally, historians have credited that transition first to Barry Goldwater in 1964, and then to Richard Nixon and campaign advisor Kevin Phillips in 1968 and 1972. Theirs was a Republican Southern strategy designed to woo disaffected Southern Democrats angry over their party's support for desegregation. Yet, as this map suggests, the contours of the Southern strategy were laid down years in advance of either candidate. Right-wing broadcasters prepared the way for the rise of the Republican South. President Kennedy knew that these broadcasters posed a serious and growing threat both to his legislative goals and to his hopes of re-election in 1964. Within weeks of his inauguration, the administration had already begun planning for his re-election campaign. Robert F. Kennedy, the new U.S. Attorney General and the president's brother, met with labor union leaders Walter and Victor Reuther multiple times in 1961 to discuss campaign strategy. Robert Kennedy tasked the Reuther brothers with a special mission: find a way to undermine the threat posed by this new political force that had come seemingly out of nowhere, the extreme...
To keep listening to this audiobook for free, click the link in the description. It will take you to a free Audible trial where you can listen to this and many other books for free for 30 days.